Hello, my name is Lasse, and today I will talk about the book From Democracy to Freedom, The Difference Between Government and Self-Determination. It is published in this year, 2017, and it doesn't have a single author, but it's published by a kind of group. It's called Crime Think, and that's kind of like an anarchist, radical left group. They publish a lot of books about, say, government and capitalism, and they have published a book about work and the work ethic, and are we required to work 8 hours a day, or why do we still work 8 hours a day? So it's they have some very interesting books with some very different ideas to what you're used to, or what one is usually used to. And in this book, they analyze democracy. They talk about, so what is democracy? And the reason why they are so interested in this question is that this group, and it's based in America, I think Oregon or somewhere, at least somewhere in America. It's like an American group, and most of them are actually anonymous, so there's not a lot of names behind it. Which is kind of interesting when you have a book where it's just kind of like a collective, so you don't really know who wrote what, and it's just, you just have this text, and I guess there's not so much like ego involved when there's no authors to be immortalized. But they're interested in democracy because people from this group have often participated in movements like Occupy, and some of them would probably be part of like a black bloc, which they have also discussed a lot. So they've had some clashes with a guy who also says he's an anarchist, but he's like a pacifist anarchist, a guy called Chris Hedges, who has denounced this black bloc. And if you don't know what a black bloc is, it's basically a tactic you do in a demonstration where you all dress in black, and then you keep together as a unit. So you cannot be say identified just because you're part of the demonstration. It's very hard to identify you. So it's harder for the police to say charge you with something afterwards. And you may say, all right, if they're just demonstrating, what they don't attack people or do something that's illegal, why would they need to protect themselves? And yeah, it's kind of in a demonstration, even though you don't do anything, you can still get in trouble just for being part of a demonstration. So with all the surveillance in our modern society and increasingly police states both in Europe and America, they feel Black Bloc is a need to actually remain anonymous and try to prevent from being singled out. So, and what they're interested in, so they have, some of the writers have participated in Occupy, they have participated in some of the demonstrations that has been in Spain and Greece. And this is kind of a book that's based on those experiences partly. And one of the things they found problematic with these people's movement is the kind of idolation or excessive focus on democracy, and how the answer to most of our trouble today is usually more democracy. We need direct democracy, and they are critical of this trend. What they want to focus on instead is the concept of freedom or self-government, self-determination is a better word, and not just democracy, because like they identify some problems with it. And well, it's kind of important to stress that these are not right-wing people who criticize democracy and then see freedom as belonging to a powerful state, where they don't really care about individual freedom, but their concept of freedom may just be that the state is free to dominate other states and is free to flourish and is free to, the state is free to just repress individuals. That could be one concept of freedom. Their concept of liberty or freedom is pretty much individualistic, but still with a community. So you're not just allowed to just go out and hurt anyone you want. And that's often one of the arguments against anarchy, is that, well, if we don't have a strong government, then the strong will just dominate the weak, and you can still just have a community or society without a government where people still protect each other against injustice. So, but anyways, their focus on this book is to, first of all, answer what is democracy and what do they find problematic with democracy. And first of all, they start by identifying that democracy, of course, started with the Athenians, or at least that's what we usually say, but it might be very possible that before the Athenians, other societies had what could be described as democracy, as just basically banding together and making a decision. And there's a quote here from the book from a guy called David Graeber, who's an anarchist anthropologist, or he studies anthropology and he's an anarchist, let's say it that way. So he says that, are we supposed to believe that before the Athenians, it never really occurred to anyone, anywhere, to gather all the members of their community in order to make joint decisions in a way that gave everyone equal say? So this kind of criticism of how we say, all right, democracy started in Athens about 500 before our time, before Christ, and before that, maybe people didn't really have democracy. And he argues that a lot of societies before the rise of the state were very egalitarian, so very, equal between the members, and a lot less hierarchical than our society today. And they also see that the inequality, both economic inequality and just power inequality, has been part of democracy from the start. And you may argue that, well, that's just a defect of democracy. So you may look at Athens and see, all right, it's democracy, but only like 1/5 of the men were able to vote, maybe. And the slaves couldn't vote, the women couldn't vote. And then you may say, well, all right, that's just kind of like a defect of democracy. Now we have improved democracy. But the question they raise is this inequality? Is this not perhaps part of the democracy? Is democracy and how we understand democracy perhaps not making together with the state? Maybe you could not imagine the state, or you could not imagine democracy without the state, and the problems with the state comes along. And what we have usually seen in our modern society is that it's very, very possible to have a democracy, so basically the rule of the people, and still have huge inequality. And we see that in pretty much all modern societies. Yeah, pretty much all modern democratic societies. Of course, other societies that's not democratic is very likely worse, but still we have a lot of problems with inequality in our democracies today. One thing they also mentioned that's kind of interesting is that how when a society goes from a monarchy to a democracy, all the institutions of what we can call the deep state, all those things part of the state, the bureaucracy, it just kind of just switches over to a democracy. It just stays in place. So all the things that were used in a monarchy, all those advisors, all those kind of positions of rank will more or less just switch over to a democracy, which is kind of interesting, because if we imagine democracy as such a different thing to monarchy, then it's kind of funny that a lot of the institutions just comes over directly. But they do stress that it's very important that discussions and collectives, networks and federations, that's good in of themselves, but it's good if it's in the pursuit of freedom and self-determination, but could be problematic if it's just as when you want a democratic government and you just use these to make more democracy. Because so one of the ideals today is, some people talk about direct democracy, and even if we could imagine that all the 200 million people of a nation could vote on the same issue, it's still problematic how, first of all, how you ask this question. So should we cut taxes or something like that, or increase taxes? How you frame the question influence how people answer it a lot. And one of the things that I was reminded of is that I saw the British version of House of Cards, and there was this woman who, she did polls on people or produced polls for a newspaper, and she said that she could basically like manipulate, get the answers you want just by asking the kind of right questions, just framing the question in a right way. And I think that's to a very large extent true. When you ask questions, that you can really influence it a lot how you ask it. And another problem with direct democracy, say that we all had a smartphone and we all just voted on each issue, then the people who designed the software and also the people who then make the questions, it could be kind of like a rule of the technocrats. That's at least what they say, to kind of warn us that even if we did have, even if we used technology to make 10 million people vote on an issue, then who designed the software and how it was designed, they find that we could easily imagine that someone might manipulate that to gain power. And also, I think one of their concerns is also, the more democratic a society gets, the more legitimate it gets. So if you have a direct democracy where everybody voted that we should exterminate people with blue hair or something like that, or yeah, then is it legitimate that the majority voted for that? So sometimes we also have it in the Danish debate where some people will say, alright, a large group of people, say 200,000 people voted on this, and 52% said yes, and 48% said no. Then only 48%, do they just have to like say, alright, they won the vote, now there's nothing we can do about it, we just gotta accept it. And I guess that's how democracy is supposed to work, but you know, what if the 52% voted to, you know, do something like kill all people with blue hair, or jail all people with blue hair, or just, you know, jail people with one ear or something. It's just, how can you need to ask the question, can you stand against the vote of the majority with your conscience? Isn't that fair to say that if some people or some group have decided upon some action, then if that goes against your conscience, shouldn't you be able to say, all right, I'm not going to do that, even though, say, 55% of the society voted for that? That's one of the questions they raise. And a more concrete example is they raise in Occupy, where they had these general assemblies. So a city would get a Occupy movement, and there would usually be a space where people would meet, and then they would exchange ideas, and they would have these meetings, and they will also decide sometimes what they should do. And they say that there was basically two concepts of this mass meeting. Some saw it as a governing body that you know you had to bring something up there, and then it would get the stamp of the approval, and then you could do it. And others just viewed it as a place where you could exchange ideas, and talk, and then you could go in separate groups, and then you could plan something. So say you want to plan a demonstration. Do you need the assent of this body, or can you just go with your own group and then do something? Or if you want to make a garden 200 meters away from the body, could you just go and do it with your friends, or did you have to get their permission? And what those that created this book argue for is that they saw the assembly as something where people could exchange ideas, but they saw it as very problematic when the assembly was looked as the only way to actually approve things. I think it's interesting how the book discusses democracy, something that's often a kind of holy idol or holy cow that we just bow down to, and we say democracy, that's something great. And I think democracy is a way to just include people in decision making is a good thing, but it's also something that's kind of needs to be examined and looked at critically, also in the way that how we have a lot of modern democracies who has engaged in very problematic behavior. So it's a way where you discuss democracy without just falling in the camp of we need a tyrant or dictator or like a monarchy back, but actually look at other ways of organizing a society, perhaps without a state, but just a society where people in federations of cities bound together, and each city or each body, people have to make their own decisions and can still act together and make sure that they do not get repressed or do not get invaded, without there being one central place or one central part of the population that just makes all the decisions.